Welcome to another meeting of the Rotary Club of Livermore. And Beth Wilson, would you be willing to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance today if everybody else leaves yourself on mute? Beth.
Yes, thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Beth. And our songsters, Michael and Stu. So Michael, do you have an introduction for us to our song?
Unmute, here I am. Yes, Stu and I did get together, and I have to hand it to Stu because there's 3 of him on this particular video, and there's only 1 of me, but that's okay. It's about social justice and all the questions that we have, and we didn't come up with any answers because it's blowing in the wind. And so here we go.
One, two.
Thank you very much, Stu and Michael. Another wonderful song for the day. And before I invite Loretta to share her thought for the day, I just want to share some hot off the press news from our fellow Rotarian, Yvonne Hopkins. Yvonne is volunteering today at a vaccination clinic at the Pleasanton Senior Center in Pleasanton, which is at 5353 Sunol Boulevard. And they had 90 extra vaccines. It's the Moderna vaccine. So they are accepting walk-in appointments, including second shot appointments. And people would need to be there by 1:45 p.m. So if you know of somebody who has not been vaccinated yet, you can share that information with them. But knowing it's walk-in, and depending however many other people get this information between 11 a.m. when Yvonne shared it with me and they arrive, it's possible appointments may be all taken, but there were up to 90 available extra appointments. So now I'd like to invite Loretta Caskey to share her thought for the day. Loretta.
Hello, fellow Rotarians. I wanted to support, as our songsters did, our speaker's topic today. And in my memory, I have not witnessed or been a part of a large or broad community of people across this nation and others standing together or marching in solidarity for a single cause. In my mind, there has been a confluence of a much needed and long delayed or denied movement to social justice. With yesterday's announcement of the justice for George Floyd's family and the larger community, I thought an appropriate thought of the day could be incorporated in 2 historic quotes. One on the definition of justice, and the second on the call, the true call of empathetic action. So Theodore Roosevelt had this to say about justice. Justice consists not in being neutral between right and wrong, but finding out the right and upholding it wherever found against the wrong. Helen Keller observed, until the great mass of people shall be filled with the sense of responsibility for each other's welfare, social justice can never be attained.
Thank you very much, Loretta. So to introduce our meeting front line, once again, Jeff is our Zoom host, and he's hungry, so we will all be finishing by 1:30 today. Christina Marion is once again our Spur reporter. Alan has done a wonderful job putting together the AV for the day. Don Wentz will be publishing the spur, and David will be monitoring the chat. So, introductions of visiting Rotarians and guests. I know we have at least one visiting Rotarian, and that is Gary Schreigerly from the Rotary Club of Pleasanton and downtown Pleasanton. And I think you were in the category of realtor. Is that correct, Gary?
Yes, 41 years this year. That's my
So,
age.
Welcome, Gary. Nice to
Thank
have you
you.
join us.
Great to be here.
Do we have any other visiting Rotarians today? And then we will be doing a recognition for an outstanding student. So we'll introduce those guests later, but I think we have a parent or Vicki Janelli. Is Vicki your guest today?
Yes. Yes.
So would you like to
Janelle's my
introduce her?
mom.
So welcome, Vicki. Thank you for joining us today. We're glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
So just sharing a couple photos from my walkabout, and these are actually more recent photos taken last weekend. You'll recall last week I showed kind of the arch near Sycamore Grove Park about Olivina. This is a photo from Sycamore Grove Park. You can see that this is a tree that suffered damage in the fires. And I think that was in August. And I recall Dennis O'Brien sharing us a photo from one of his neighbors took about just the hill right there in Sycamore Grove being on fire. But nature is very resilient, as we'll see in this next photo. And right now, there are a lot of wildflowers in bloom at Sycamore Grove Park. And maybe somebody knows, we have a lot of people who like to look at wildflowers, identify that particular wildflower for us in the chat. So if you haven't been out to Sycamore Grove, I highly recommend it. It's beautiful year round, and you get to see nature in action. So I'd like to now invite Hank Shade to do our introduction and presentation to do a Student of the Month and Outstanding Student Recognition. Hank.
Hello. Today from Vineyard High, the principal, Estrada Hidalgo, will introduce the Student of the Month, Janelli Aceves Pacaccio, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. And so now, Ms. Estrada Hidalgo, please.
Thank you, everyone, for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to present with Janelli with an Outstanding Student Award or recognition. I would like to say a couple of things on behalf of her teachers that they have submitted, recognizing her and her achievements. So Janelli started at Vineyard Alternative School her freshman year of high school. During her time here, she has flourished into a successful, motivated, and responsible student. Even though Janelli was a quiet and shy freshman, she joined Vineyard's first leadership class her junior year. As a leadership student, she has learned how to become a leader, a team builder, and a peer educator. Janelli has always shown respect and empathy towards her classmates. She proves to be an advocate for social justice issues and always promotes inclusivity. Her leadership teachers and classmates are grateful for the safe space she has always provided. One of her former teachers comments that Janelli was always fully prepared for class. She has great work ethic. Her written work always detailed and showed thought. She is a positive person who was a joy to teach. Her work and involvement went beyond the mere requirements of the course. A current teacher mentions that Janelli is an excellent student who takes pride in her work. She attends class regularly and participates in class discussions. She is a bright, enthusiastic learner, and her smile brought joy to the Vineyard Alternative School community. It was a true pleasure being Janelli's teacher. All of our teachers here at Vineyard are very impressed with Janelli's growth and know her road to success is only just the beginning. So Janelle, I welcome you to say a few things. You are a senior this year, so you will be graduating. So please welcome Janelle.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, Vineyard has really helped me grow and take my education into my own hands, which I really appreciate. And I was able to catch up on my credits easily there because the teachers were so helpful and supportive. Now that I'm going to be graduating this year, I plan on going to Las Positas in the fall and take care of my general education. I'm not positive what I want to major in, but I do find social and environmental science very interesting. Overall, the school was exactly what I needed when I entered, and I'm really grateful for the education.
Thank you, Janelle. That was great. And we look forward to hearing from you maybe these next couple of years to see where you're going and knowing exactly where you stand when it comes to your decision on a major. So I appreciate it. And thank you for being here, Vicki.
And Hank, would you like to share what will be presented to Janelle or available for her?
Well, I've already taken over to Vineyard High School a plaque, which is inscribed to the Student of the Month for this year and for this month, and also a number of certificates from merchants in town, which would enable her to get a free Jamba Juice or a free hamburger and so on and so forth. At any rate, I think those are nice, but the major thing is that she knows that she's recognized.
Yes, congratulations, Janelle. We're very, it's a privilege for us to be able to honor you this way. We're very proud of your accomplishments at Vineyard High School and proud that you're choosing to continue your post-secondary education right here in our own backyard at Las Positas College. It's such a wonderful community college. And we know that you'll continue to bloom and grow while at Las Positas College. So on behalf of the Rotary Club of Livermore, congratulations and keep up all of your hard work.
Thank you.
You're very welcome, Janelle. And so up now, we have a recognition for all of our April birthdays and anniversaries. Alan, take it away.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rotarians. Happy birthday to you. Let me call you sweetheart. I'm in love with you. Let me hear you whisper that you love me too. Keep the love like
So happy birthday and happy anniversary to everybody who is celebrating this month. And it's really hard to believe that Gowd and Kala have been married for 61 years. Thanks for being that example for us. So Joel Swanson, I'd like you to be able to talk about some work that was done by Rotarians out at Sunflower Hill Gardens, Rotarians in Action. Joel.
Sure. Picture this. It was a crisp, beautiful spring day. We had a chance to go out and play in the dirt and talk to other people. It was a lot of fun. We worked for a good 3 hours. I really think that Christian and Paul Smid did the hardest work because they had to pull all those weeds from between the rows. And Jeff and Pat Coyle and I only had to pound in big steel stakes. So good time was had by all. And the next time it comes up, I'll be sure to advertise to the Rotary Club because it's a good chance to get out and enjoy fellowship and the great weather we have here. That's it.
So thank you very much, Joel, and make sure to look for those opportunities that come up. I wanted to let you know that the Rotarian Foundation of Livermore Board of Directors has 3 openings for members from this club. We have 3 board members who are terming off their terms, and that's Ken Perrine, though he'll stay on the board as the next year's club president, Pat Coyle, and Mark Roberts. So if you are interested in serving on that board, please send me an email. And actually there's a typo right there. So it's PEDROZZI, only one I in pedrozzi.org. And let me know if you are interested in serving on that board. You can learn more information from the other board members on there if you'd like. Marianne Roja also serves on that board currently from our club. And just let us know. It's a very rewarding experience. And just a reminder, you'll see that there are special virtual backgrounds that Jeff Youngsma and Pat Coyle have right now, and Kathy Coyle when she's on camera. This Saturday starts the district training assembly. You may see a lot of familiar faces, and you'll definitely want to join in for the keynote speaker, which is at 11 a.m. on Saturday. There's no cost to join, and you can do it from the comfort of your own home. So if you go to our website and take the link to the district website, you'll find all the Zoom links, and we'll put that in the chat as well. And so next week, we have an opportunity to hear about Kids Teach Tech. And I have heard from Angelica, one of our former club members, who's now a current member of the Rotary Club of Livermore Valley, or the Morning Club, who recommended this presentation to us, that this is a fabulous presentation that you are not going to want to miss. So Arjan Mulchandani will be sharing with us about kids who are teaching other kids tech. So come to be inspired. And this week, our own Stu Gary is going to be giving us a presentation, and a very timely presentation, on social justice. So Stu, I invite you to take over. And I recommend that everybody puts your view into speaker mode during the program. Stu.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm joined by an associate at Citygate. I'll introduce in just a moment. When I was touched on the shoulder to be a program about policing and police master plans as part of my local government consulting practice last fall, little did I believe we would be literally today where we are as of yesterday. We've called this social justice. It's really a blend of police department master planning, performance auditing, and those of us working in the field to improve police departments, police department cultures, and that has many, many branches to the tree. And we won't get into homelessness today. We won't get into criminal justice reform. We won't get into district attorneys charging certain crimes or not. But we're going to talk about how we do the work of improving police departments and what social justice and the challenges in the policing field are today. We're going to breeze through some PowerPoint slides and then have plenty of time looking at the clock for questions. With me today is Richard Ward, Senior Police Associate for Citygate Associates. I'll ask Rich to introduce himself in a moment and his background. Some of you that are newer to the club maybe don't even know me post-COVID. I'm the retired fire chief of Livermore Pleasanton. I spent my entire career in fire and EMS, literally starting as a volunteer in high school. I went full-time my 18th year, did all of my college, bachelor's and master's while I was working full-time in the field, promoted through the ranks, came fire chief of Livermore in '94, helped create and merge the Livermore Pleasanton Fire Department in '96, and retired from that in 2005. My fire services deployment, teaching, and consulting work for a national organization led me to Citygate Associates. Citygate Associates is a sole proprietorship LLC. We only work for local government agencies. We consider the public and the elected officials as our clients. We do not take any private sector work. I'm the public safety principal. I actually field two teams. Today, we're going to be talking about the police team. And Rich, while I start the PowerPoint, why don't you unmute and introduce yourself and your background?
Good afternoon, everyone. My pleasure to be here. Thanks, Stu. Yes, my name's Rich Word. I started my career in Oakland back in 1984. I was there for 20 years, my last 5 years as its chief of police. I was appointed by our former governor and Oakland's former mayor, Jerry Brown. So that was 5 years of excitement. And then I left Oakland in 2004, joined the city of Vacaville, and I worked there as chief for 9 years. Then after that, in 2014, I was an interim chief in a small town up here in Contra Costa County, Pinole. I've been with Citygate for a year, so I'm excited to work with Stu and my police colleagues on this whole issue of looking at police departments, helping them to get better in this very, very challenging time. Thank you.
So in a moment here, I assume everyone now has a slide on their screen.
Yep.
Yes, we do.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yes.
I never trust Zoom to do the thing when I tell it to do it. Real quick, our police team is diverse. And I want to begin by saying, if you're going to analyze and improve police services, it really takes a lot of different skill sets working together. So Rich introduced himself. I'm not going to go through each person other than to say we have retired police captains, a retired undersheriff, we have state police personnel. We have a gentleman that retired from the California Peace Officer Standards Bureau, and his whole career has been in law enforcement. Our stats analyst is trilingual, married to a wonderful Chinese partner, and they have a child together. And Eric can do statistics in his head while I'm reaching for a calculator. We have a very data-driven business. Marla is a advocate for alternative response, mental health, mobile field teams, and she's shepherded nonprofits for 25 years. The city of San Diego successfully providing public safety incident support with crisis support teams. Chief Laura Wilson is still currently the police chief at Stanford University and has been a prior client. So we have Midwest personnel, we have West Coast personnel, we currently practice west of the Mississippi. In fact, right now, more of our police jobs are outside of California than in California. I want to start with some policy choices. And pre-Floyd, and I'll say that simply because it was an earthquake, but pre-George Floyd incident, even our elected official clients in many cases really don't come to their new jobs as an elected official, or even sometimes up through the rank city managers, until they really learn that in policing, there really are no federal or state regulations directing police staffing levels, response times, or outcomes. It's a local choice issue in America. Communities design the police departments that they want to protect and help themselves. There are published best practices, for example, for the International Association of Police Chiefs and other organizations. And we use those best practice sideboards as well as federal and state regulations when we analyze and talk to a city manager and council about best practices in the communities they serve. And the bottom line is elected officials are challenged to balance public safety with fiscal responsibility. And both during the recession and since economically, we've had some of the most, what you would consider wealthiest communities or cities as clients, the smallest to the biggest. Even the city of Los Angeles claims to not have enough money to field the police or fire or emergency medical services they desire, much less mobile crisis health and support teams. Everyone's challenged economically. So we use the data and evidence-based decisions as best practice guidelines, and we do custom work to analyze each agency. We don't have a pro forma that we sell. We don't have a report that we just change the names to protect the prior client. We go in, do a very deep dive on the agencies. The capstone issues today, as I see it, my 51st or so year in public safety in local government, American policing is entering an era where those historically impacted are demanding to be heard and to have a voice in how they want to be policed. And I realize there's voices from many angles right now, and you've heard the term defunding, and even to the extreme, we don't need a police department. We'll chat more about all that in a few minutes. We believe, however, and the public needs to understand, change must be done with the members of the agency, not to the members of the agency. You cannot write a script, pass a law, issue a new playbook, and force a public safety culture to turn on a dime. It takes leadership, continued throughput, follow-up, quality control assurance, transparency, and oversight. And we're also finding in most communities, and the low trust was always there, but there's now a heightened sense of how do we police the police department? And Minneapolis and others are poster childs for that right now. How do you police the police department? Rich, why don't you take from here?
Okay, thank you. Some of the top recommendations that we've made to some of our clients include this whole idea, and you may have heard it, of a community police review board to establish a system of oversight, in addition to an elected body like a city council. Even in Vacaville and of course in Oakland, the city council often doesn't have the time, the resources, the staff to oversee and address police issues, especially when you need to get into the weeds. So some, especially larger jurisdictions, have enlisted or appointed these boards. I think some work well. There are not many across the country. I think there's 18,000 police agencies and just a couple of hundred boards, usually in larger jurisdictions. So they have been effective. There's mixed reviews. It depends on the nature and type of board. We also have proposed that policing models be built that are data-driven. And those tend to drive alternative responses, balanced responses. It's not simply arrest. We heard from one client that officers are arresting, making dual arrest of in domestic violence calls, arresting both the predominant aggressor, the primary aggressor, and the caller, because for officers it was CYA. And so we're thinking with data, learning about alternatives, they won't do that. They'll identify the primary aggressor and not arrest both parties. And this will help, as our slide notes, to reduce potential conflict points. Imagine taking two parents to jail and you have an adult son there who's upset. You're arresting mom and she called us. That won't go over well. Defining what matters and developing measures. This is so important. I've learned it the hard way in Oakland, where we were measuring arrests and citations and search warrants and drug seize and gun seize and cash seized. And we weren't measuring conduct, complaints, and language. It was amazing if you would listen to police officers in the building and maybe quietly sitting in a restaurant, some of the language they would use. And if that wasn't called out by commanders and supervisors, it tended to reflect how they treated people in the community. So language is a measure that I think more departments need to consider. And then these strategies for engagement. I mean, these are essentially only limited by our imaginations. Meeting people where they are, getting out of the car, meeting people at restaurants, just walking and talking. People don't want, even those not necessarily supportive or trusting of the police, want to see them walking, talking to youth, and simply engaging people and smiling and being transparent. It doesn't happen enough, especially sadly in the jurisdictions that most need it, the busy ones, such as the Oaklands and the Baltimores and the Philadelphias. Next slide, Stu. This whole idea of guardians versus warriors, it was pioneered as our last bullet notes in Washington State. But I would hope, I think it's still current and catching on. The guardian mindset is one where officers are trained to be tactically aware, tactically safe, but they approach contacts in a more empathetic manner. They're thinking, how do I solve this problem? How do I protect a life? I want to go home, but I want to make sure everyone goes home. Hopefully I don't have to come back. Whereas a soldier mindset comes in as an occupying force, somebody who's here, I'm not from the community, I'm only here to work, to make some money, have some fun, collect some overtime, and then go home. That's what people feel too often. I had those complaints in Oakland. Not enough officers, they would say, Chief, live in this community. They don't even have a connection to Oakland. They come here, this is a playground, and then they go home. That's not what we want, and that's what we look for when we meet with our different client agencies. Next slide. Thanks, Stu. This is huge. I think Minneapolis, if they could go back, they would want to do a better job of building and sustaining trust. The chief in Ferguson, Missouri, thought he had the trust of the community before the Michael Brown incident. He learned the hard way that he did not. You have to build trust and make these efforts in anticipation of a crisis, because a crisis will come. It could come in Livermore, it could come in Vacaville, where I am, it could come in Oakland, but they will come. We have to anticipate that. You make these trust deposits, and to do that, you have to make sure that you give officers time to meet with people, and that time has to be recognized and rewarded. We tend to reward these great arrests, which are often by chance, they're luck. You pull over a car, there's a cache of dope in the trunk. Nothing, didn't involve much hard work, but we need to make time where officers are on bicycle, walking in commercial districts, in schools. You bring the community in, they can serve as role players. We've had community members participate in oral boards for new hires and promotional exams. And citizens of police academies, if you have not participated in one, I would really encourage it. They are fantastic. You learn so much about what goes on. It truly demystifies policing. But it should be recognized and measured just as an arrest or citations or some other traditional police work. And I don't think this has been a slow move for policing in the country. It's not something most officers have hired on. I didn't hire on with this in mind. I wanted to, if you remember Hill Street Blues, take a dirt bag to jail was Belker's line. And that's how I hired on to do that. And Oakland rewarded that. But policing has changed, rightfully so. Next slide.
Let me pause there, Rich, and say one thing we find still commonly in our clients under the guise of what gets measured gets done. I can't tell you how many agencies look surprised when we say, would you show us your performance evaluations? Show us your reward system. Show us your promotional exams. Show us your recruit academy training syllabus. And show us how you're training, measuring, and holding officers accountable for community engagement. Show us the incident patrol log data. Show us how time spent on the beat is apportioned to engagement. They can't do it. Radio silence, tone deaf. It just doesn't exist. They pay lip service to it, but in a bureaucracy, in a human culture of people working together to deliver an outcome, what gets measured gets done. What gets held accountable gets adhered to. Go ahead, Rich.
Some other work and recommendations we've made in terms of community engagement. We've heard consistently that communities want to hear from their chief, not simply the public information officer or some sergeant working in some investigative unit. The chief is the one that the community will hold accountable for the actions of the officers, of his or her officers. So they want to hear from the chief. And community engagement is not simply defined by social media. A lot of departments do a great job of reaching out via Twitter or Facebook, Instagram, you name it, TikTok, all manner of social media. But they want to see people, officers again, meeting with them, talking to them, smiling, especially working with youth. And I tell you, when you do that, it often translates into a recruiting effort. People begin to see what they like and they say, well, maybe I want to be a part of such an organization if that's what they do. And so it does. Community engagement often translates into good recruitment. Some common themes that we note here is this: when we stop people or people are arrested or given citation, officers often don't take the time to explain why and what happened, what they saw, how the process works, and how the process will unfold. So it's important for officers to take that time. Many people feel, okay, I understand what happened, I didn't like it, or I agree with the outcome, but boy, his bedside manner was poor. He never stopped to explain to me. I felt disrespected in this encounter. And that's what officers need to be taught, coached, mentored, and held accountable to. We also found that ineffective community police review boards, I saw that in Oakland. We saw it with another client. They can really breed even more negative perceptions. Where they can be useful in helping community engagement and helping to improve a police department, they can backfire if there's this infighting between the chief, Police Officers Association, the bargaining units, and board members. We've seen that too. Next slide. Is that mine too?
It is.
And another, in terms of what we've heard in some of our clients, they want to see alternatives. They don't want to see the police responding to homeless calls if in fact there's not a need for police. They don't want to have police responding to mental health crises. They want to see alternatives to that. Maybe there can be an alternatives in domestic violence calls, child abuse calls, elder abuse calls. People want to see that. Of course, they have to be funded. The people assigned have to be trained. Many African-American and other minority group members simply lack trust in the police, period. They lack trust. I saw it in Oakland. I've seen it in Vacaville. I saw it in Pono. We've seen it with our clients. It's inevitable. If they haven't had a bad encounter, they know someone that has. And that sits with them for years and years. They fear the police, often don't call the police. In our last client, they kept saying to me, why I was upset with the officer's behavior. I said, did you make a complaint? Inevitably, the answer is no. They said, as Stu mentioned in a prior slide, they don't have trust in the police officers' ability to police themselves. We've heard from police officers and community members that police have become a catch-all. They've been asked to do too much. I agree with that. I think most police officers would agree. This is one point where I think even critics of the police and police could agree, and some headway could be made here, where police, especially if you lack police resources, you could free up time. In effect, give yourself more police resources if you could take away some of their duties where they lack expertise. People have said consistently to us they want to see a diverse police force that they think are sensitive, that understand our issues, that are sympathetic and empathetic, and they can come in with that in mind, having understood maybe there's a background in this community that may not be known from someone who doesn't understand the community. And then having a more trauma-informed police response. They understand that they understand the signs of trauma. And I need to understand, now I know why this person might be acting the way he or she is, because there's a trauma here. And they need to understand and make that approach. We've seen trauma-informed or not informed, where two officers are at a scene and they're giving conflicting commands. One's yelling, get up, get down, I should say. Another says, put your hands up. And you're yelling in uniform, guns drawn. I mean, that is going to make worse in a situation. It's not going to de-escalate it. Again, as I mentioned, the community, one of the key themes, they want to see officers with young people. And I found where officers are working on school, they tend to have great relationships with the students. I've had students tell me, this officer is different from those in the police car. And I tell them they're the same, and the students will push back. No, they're not. They're much different. I know this one. I don't know those in the police car. They intimidate me. This balance of prevention, intervention, enforcement, it's often out of balance, especially in the busier jurisdictions that we've seen. And there needs to be balance, prevention, intervention, enforcement. It can't be too heavily in favor of enforcement. It may be in some circumstances, but it shouldn't be always. You can work with gang members and maybe their siblings to get them into programs. You can work with victims of violent crime to help them get out of a situation. You can educate maybe around a college, educate students to sexual abuse and sexual assault so that these crimes don't occur. But also, of course, we know there's always going to be a need for enforcement. I think those are.
Yeah, and before I go, I want to go back to the first and last bullet. I didn't put a whole slide on the systems approach. And it's easy to say police should not go to or be a bystander to certain types of incidents, mental health, emotional crises. And Citygate design a system that sends different people in a different vehicle, non-sworn, to these situations to assist or take over from law enforcement. And like all of you to understand, that's the easy thing to do. We can do the math of deployment, hour of the day, day of the week, but they have to go somewhere. Homeless need housing. Homeless need services. Mental health people need services. We have a client right now in the Midwest where when a mental health patient is put under a law enforcement or family requested justifiable hold, they sit 3 days on the gurney in the emergency room because the county doesn't have the mental health hospital receiving beds to get a mental health psychiatrist to see the person. I will guarantee you almost right now, John George in Oakland, when I did the EMS ambulance redesign here 3 years ago for Alameda County, they wanted alternative response to mental health emergencies. The neck in the bottle is the lack of beds at the single county mental health receiver. They sit in ERs, they sit in EMT ambulances. You have to fund and fill the whole system based on the need of people in crisis, and they have to end up somewhere. And we do not, as a society, do a good job at that. So let's talk about some of the nuts and bolts in policing. I'm not going to walk through all of this other than to say we deeply go into response time. In the lower left is total response time to high priority calls. Most city councils do not receive adequate data on police response times, type of call severities, and where their resource investment is going. We come along and not only use a fractal 90% goal measure, but we look at the high priority calls. And in this client, the light blue is dispatch processing time. The dark blue is driving time to critical emergencies. And we had to point out to this client, on an overdose, 90% of the callers are on the phone with the 911 center for 6.8 minutes. The officer needs to get moving. It's an overdose. That maybe Narcan needs to be administered. EMS needs to be notified. So client X, you're spending far too long playing 20 questions with the caller instead of getting the resources moving and then asking follow-up questions as necessary. And then you have to look at geography, traffic, time of day, and beat design to say, can I get an officer to a life and death emergency in the number of minutes the community is paying for? Another thing that we have found post-COVID, which in retrospect is not surprising, but we're being hit in the face with the data. And across the board, domestic disturbance, battery, overdose, weapon use, suicide is sky high, armed robbery, sex crimes, everything here in red is increased growth in calendar 2020 in a Midwest client city. And it's people locked up too long together. And I say locked up loosely, I'm not criticizing COVID, but people spending too much time together without getting apart and doing what they normally did socially, and they're turning on themselves. And all of our police clients are dismayed and trying to catch up with how do we put more resources quickly into domestic disturbance, assault, battery, et cetera. And we have to help our clients understand you have to build a police department on the balls of its feet, able to pivot when they see a surge in activity, whether it's by neighborhood or a larger section of a city, a micro neighborhood. You need to pivot and help those people then and there. You can't wait a year or two to see a data trend and say, oops, missed that one. We also look at staffing. This is complicated. I'm going to just take one row across. The far left table is the number of officer hours per hour that this community has committed to 911 dispatch incident in progress. So if you look at the 11 o'clock hour on the left, you see the red number 4. That means they had 4 officer hours committed from 11 to 12 noon on Wednesdays for 911 calls. Well, we now compare that to the green chart in the middle and say, but how many officers did you have on duty? Oh, well, I had 8 officers on duty 11 a.m. on Wednesday. So then the right chart puts a percentile to it. So what percent of utilization? If you expect officers to do community engagement and social justice work, they have to have time to do it. And if they're running from 911 to 911 call, how do they do the other value add services? So in this case, the red box on the right says, hello, client, at 8 and 9 in the morning, you're approaching at 1.68% utilization of the smaller number of people on duty. We've recommended to clients they change their staffing plans and their staffing start and stop times because they don't align staffing with the actual demand curve data. And I know a lot of you in this club are highly educated. You've worked in businesses and done research where you follow the data, and you probably just heard me say, what do you mean they don't follow the demand curve for data? How basic is that? Rich and I are here to tell you, a lot of police departments don't. It's the by guess and by golly method. Well, the chief before me did it this way, so we're going to staff this way today. We also use GIS to look at hotspots of activity and patterns, whether it's traffic, particular crimes, what risks on the ground drive demand for policing. And I want to say here, we all have to be very careful, because if you paint neighborhoods with certain types of demography problems with a map and a public report, you could be essentially telling everybody else, don't buy a home in that neighborhood. It's poor, it's disadvantaged, it's high crime. And you can argue the other side of the coin, but that should be disclosed. And the answer is yes, it should be. But we have to try to strike a balancing point to inform city leadership where police changes have to occur without throwing a neighborhood under the cultural bus that, oh, you're the worst off in the city of Acmeville. But we do use these tools to do some deep analysis. Rich?
Some recent changes we've seen in California on law enforcement reform, and I think Governor Newsom would say these are just the tip of the iceberg. I think he would agree that he wants to go further. The ban on carotid or sleeper restraints, the so-called chokehold, many of those have been banned well before Floyd and years prior, rightfully so, because often in those encounters, it's so hard to get the correct hold, and so they're dangerous. And officers now have been taught basically with the taser and pepper spray, they tend to want to be hands off such that they don't break the small bones in their hand, and maybe they don't have their weapon taken. So those have been banned here in California. And most recently, the California Attorney General is now required to conduct some investigations into deadly police shootings where the person shot is unarmed. And so that's new. Before, most of these were conducted with a police department in conjunction with the local county DA. More transparency in the jury selection process, a broader issue outside of policing. This addresses the whole idea of peremptory challenges of DAs or defense attorneys, where they could just, without a reason, disqualify and excuse a certain prospective juror. And now, the categories covered here include gender identity, sexual orientation. Those categories weren't addressed before in the law. Juvenile suspects before, the age had been 15 or younger, where you had to basically, he or she was allowed to consult with an attorney before a custodial interrogation. That age has now been moved up to 17 or younger, where you can't interrogate such a juvenile without first giving them the opportunity to consult with an attorney in person, over the phone, or video conference. This is national. This is not law yet. A House of Representatives resolution number 1280. This is passed by the House. It's not yet taken up, not approved by the Senate. The duty to intervene where an officer has to report on the misconduct of another if it's seen, if it's on duty. The ban on no-knock warrants, where you can basically go in without knocking on a door. I've done these. and you suspect there's violence if you knock. There's likely to be more violence. There's likely to be a destruction of evidence if you knock. Well, now in this proposal, they would ban such a no-knock warrant. Chokeholds, as we mentioned, they're now law in California. They're banned. The buying of military surplus weapons and parts and ammunition, that's proposed in the House resolution bill that be banned. Use of body-worn cameras. I mean, obviously, many agencies now, I love these. I call it a witness in your pocket, or now you wear it on your chest. They're great as an investigative tool. They're great evidence. And then, of course, releasing it, the transparency issue again, that's important. And agencies are struggling with the funding to find staff to redact images in some of their footage. It's not as easy as just wearing a camera. We have to store the footage, release the footage. Before we release it, you have to go through each image. All of it. You have 6 officers at the scene and they're all running tape. You may have hours of coverage and then you have to redact certain images. And use of in-car cameras. Some agencies have both. And so under this law, you would either use one of, I believe they want one or the other, preferably both. And I don't know, but I would hope they attach funding if this is eventually passed.
So some of you probably heard of the 8 Can't Wait movement. I'm not going to go through all of these in depth other than to say prior to, but increasingly post Floyd and even post the House of Representatives resolution, the police reform movement in America talked about chokeholds, requiring de-escalation, warning before shooting, et cetera, duty to intervene. Rich mentioned that, banning shooting at vehicles. So we take this with our clients as a construct, and then we also have to talk practically about, well, 8 Can't Wait says never shoot at a moving vehicle. Well, is it never, or is it an extraordinarily rare circumstance, but you can't categorically rule it out? If you were the poor Capitol police officer a few weeks ago at the cement barricade with a vehicle bearing down on you, intending to hit you, and in that case, kill the officer, if you see a vehicle being used as a weapon of murder, is it okay to try to shoot to stop the driver and thus the vehicle? Not Hollywood, don't shoot the tire out. No cowboy heroics. Deadly force may have to be authorized in that situation. Verbal warnings are absolutely appropriate to give, but if somebody pulls a gun on you in a second and you have a second to react, can you also be mandated to show that on your body camera you provided a verbal warning when you were drawn upon? I'm not saying waving arms, I'm not saying waving a knife, I'm not saying mental health crisis. If somebody you feel is absolutely about to take your life, do you have a duty to warn them first? And one of the other 8 points is to exhaust all other means prior to using deadly force. We certainly all want that as a society. I know we do as a consulting team. We teach and coach to that. But to put absolutes in writing is going to take away the gray area of law enforcement. And that's why if you participate in a police review academy and learn about the gray area decisions, and it sounds easy to be sitting at a training table and spending minutes and minutes to talk about a gray area call, where in real life, that gray area decision by that officer or pair of officers may go down in less than 5 seconds. Pretty hard to debate gray area calls in seconds. So with that, I'll stop the PowerPoint. You can see we're passionate and I didn't leave a lot of time for questions, but we've got time for questions, and have at either one of us. Thanks for your time.
All right, so Stu, I'm going to start with some questions that were in the chat. So one was to really explaining what qualified immunity is.
Go for it, Rich.
Yeah, my understanding, and this is probably a controversial one for law enforcement. Someone else had a question around unions. I suspect unions and other interest groups for law enforcement are going to vociferously oppose this one. This is where you're acting within the course and scope of your duties. And so the courts have ruled, not just law enforcement, of course, this applies to government officials. If you're acting within the course and scope, within policy, and you make a mistake, there's a horrible case where an officer shot accidentally a 10-year-old when he intended to shoot a dog in another state, and he was granted qualified immunity, if you can imagine that. So this would change where they would say, well, clearly you violated this person's constitutional or statutory rights. And so qualified immunity should not apply in that case. I would agree, it should not apply. He should be held civilly liable, or the agency should at least in that case. So that's the idea. If you're, and I've often taught officers, if you stick within policy, you're going to be protected. But this would kind of bend that statute, that principle of the law to say, wait a minute, your policy may be bad. And in our experience as consultants, we've seen policy is only as good as what agencies, sergeants and lieutenants allow. De facto, that becomes the policy, not what's written. So an officer may say, well, I've done what my sergeant told me to do. That became my policy. Yeah, but the sergeant allowed you to violate someone's constitutional rights. And that's the issue. What's being enforced may not be within policy. It may not be within the law, but it becomes a practice within an agency. And I think that's the challenge. And that's the challenge people are making relative to ending or limiting qualified immunity.
And you kind of touched on the question about the police unions, but what role do police unions have in talking about the changes that you were have discussed today, and whether the perception of protecting bad apples?
Yeah,
what's the role of police unions in this reform?
You wind us both up, and we'll rage at the machine for 15 minutes on this one.
Well, you don't have that long, Stu.
I know. So they have to be worked with. They have to be made partners. They have to be consulted, just like members of the community of all walks and colors and faiths and beliefs have to be consulted. You have to want to police your community, not deploy to and occupy your community. And they have a seat at the table, and it takes good strategic thinking and good master plan thinking on the department's part to include them. On our projects, we listen to them at the beginning of the project along with executive management. And it varies state to state, whether it's a strong or a weak union. And it also varies in every state house in America based on how big a check they can write to whose campaign. Let's just call it for what it is. There is a lot of campaign money spent by prison and police unions in every state of the union. Next happy question.
All right, one last question is just really the question that came out just recently of the incident. Is it how is it that a police officer can mix up a taser and a gun? For those of us who have never held either in our hand, that's hard to understand.
I'll let Rich start, and then I'll give you the latest research opinion. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, I mean, they do feel the same in the hand. And typically the grip is very similar, but in my training and experience, there's a different color. For one, typically they're yellow. You train them to cross draw. If your dominant hand is right, then you cross draw to your left, not your left waistband, but your left thigh. That's where it's carried. But again, I look at that officer, the female officer involved, I forget the agency, 25, 28 years. That 25, 28 years is irrelevant. I bet you she's probably drawn that taser a handful of times, and most of that has been in training. So that's the key, is how do we train them for these high risk, very emotional situations? And that's the training that has to take place. But we saw it with Oscar Grant on the BART platform, of course, that too. They're not common, thankfully, but more and more training needs to take place. And for some people that are not competent, as we used to say with the baton, don't give them one. They should not have one.
All right, thank you very much. We have.
Well, let me finish with just a real quick
Stu.
thought. So the countervailing thing real quick is latest research, which is very controversial. It's very difficult to deprogram muscle memory. Mm-hmm. You train and qualify at the weapons range more often with your service revolver. So as your brain goes into crisis mode, you don't reach with your weak hand on the opposite hip. You're immediately trying to do something, and your muscle memory is moving faster than your stressed brain is. My point as an ex-elected official is the taser or the gun should not have been pulled on the kid in the car. Why is deadly force being used too fast, too soon, on BS level incidents. Back off, de-escalate, use verbal judo, calm the situation down. No one needs to die over that encounter with a police department.
Okay, and this discussion could go on a long time here. It's also occurring in our own community. So if you look at the chat, I referenced that to you. Our fellow Rotarian and City Council member Trish Monroe reminded us that the council subcommittee on equity and inclusion is reporting out at next Monday's City Council meeting. And part of that is looking at reconciling the possible current policy with the 8 can't wait. So recommend that you join that to continue the dialogue. So thank you very much. And just a reminder too, that all of our Rotary Club meetings are recorded. That's why there's the little up on your top left of your screen, the recording. And then we make these recordings available. If there's been very valuable information here that you want to be able to share with other people, we'll do that. And then Stu, I'll connect with you. I think there are some people who would like to have copies of the presentation if that's available as well. And also watch for the recording. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for another meeting of the Rotary Club of Livermore. And I look forward to seeing you next week, if not before, but seeing you next week on Zoom. So this concludes our meeting for today.